Welcome to the Endo Kids Podcast, the podcast where we help families navigate the ups and downs and in-betweens of growing up healthy. I'm Dr. Rinku Mehra, the founder of Endo Kids Concierge and a pediatric endocrinologist, and my co-host is Dr. Lindsey Waldman, who is also a board-certified pediatric endocrinologist. We are here to break down the science of hormones, share real stories, and answer the questions parents wonder about the most. So whether you're worried about growth, puberty, thyroid, or just want to understand your child's development a little bit better, you're in the right place. We believe every family deserves answers, support, and a caring partner in their health journey. So grab a cup of coffee, get comfortable, and let's tackle this topic together today. This podcast is for educational purposes only and is not a substitute for medical advice. Please consult your child's healthcare provider for individualized care.
Welcome to the Endo Kids Podcast. My name is Dr. Lindsey Waldman. I am a pediatric endocrinologist, and today I am super excited to have Brittany Shapiro joining us. Brittany is a nutritionist with Capital Pediatric Nutrition. We are super excited to hear her thoughts on nutrition in pediatrics. So as we begin, Brittany, tell me a little bit about your background and what got you inspired to work with kids as a nutritionist.
Yeah, great question. Thank you all for having me. So I would say I always knew I wanted to work with kids from a young age. And I got caught onto nutrition for my own health problems early on. And I think I was just really inspired by all the different directions that you can go within that career path. I did my training over at the NIH, and I went on to work at the Children's National Medical Center for my first job and was surrounded by 20 plus other pediatric dietitians and was able to really learn from the other dietitians, but also the other professionals. So love collaborating with GI doctors, endocrinologists, all different types of speech therapists and OTs. So I think it's just great to be able to work in my specialized field, but also collaborate with a lot of professionals to support children, since we know taking a very holistic approach is really key.
Perfect. And tell me a little bit about what you're doing now, what your day-to-day looks like.
Yeah, so I now work exclusively in my private practice that I own. I support families ranging from little babies with problems with gaining weight or food allergies or problems with taking solid foods, all the way to teenagers. Definitely a lot of growth challenges, a lot of GI problems, whether they're having some irritable bowel syndrome type symptoms or maybe constipation or celiac disease, that sort of thing. And especially in the toddlers and the school age children, I'm working a lot on picky eating, and they might have some sensory struggles and not wanting to eat a variety of foods for the texture difficulties, or maybe they have problems with chewing and swallowing. A lot of picky eating is an area that I definitely specialize in.
And that is a great segue because that's absolutely something that I wanted to chat about. And so when you have a family come to you and they explain that their child is, quote, a picky eater, what do you do with that? What are some of the ways that you can help some of these families?
Yeah, I always start with just this realization that picky eating is very subjective. And so, what one family might report as having a picky eater might be a very different definition to another family. And really, I say it really only matters if it's problematic to that family, right? So, if one family has a child that's eating 5 different fruits or vegetables and they're happy and that's working for them, no problem. It's they're growing and thriving. But another family might feel like that is too limiting and that they want their child to broaden their palate there. So I think if it's a goal of the family, the parents, and potentially even the child, definitely something that we can work on. I also like to distinguish the picky eaters from the problem feeders here. And I think this is a very hot topic and something that we're really learning more and more about. But just thinking about how limited is their range, and are they meeting their basic nutrition needs in terms of their vitamins and minerals? Are they meeting their needs in order to get enough calories to grow? And so how urgent is the problem, and who really needs to be part of the team? So definitely I recommend a dietitian like myself to do an initial nutrition evaluation. It never hurts. You don't even have to have a nutrition problem to meet with a dietitian to just check all the boxes there. But then we look at whether we need any other professionals to join, whether it might be a feeding therapist or a psychologist, or maybe a medical professional like a GI doctor or an endocrinologist. So I'm really helping to evaluate the nutrition status of the child, make suggestions to ensure that they're growing and thriving in terms of their foods and their schedule that they're following for meals and snacks, really how to set up the environment around eating. And then also trying to understand what other barriers are at play and who might need to join us in that feeding team here.
I think that's a really important point because certainly none of us work alone. And I think that's one of the reasons why we wanted to bring you on the podcast, right? As an endocrinologist, I can help in all different ways, but I can't do everything. And the same goes for you as a nutritionist. And so I think it is both of our jobs when we initially see patients to get that history and to figure out who else needs to join our team. So I think that's a really important point. Now, when you see some of these families, what are some of the common mistakes, or I like to use the word maybe opportunities that parents have when you're seeing some of these kids?
Absolutely. And I never want to make any parent feel like they've done anything wrong or cause any kind of shame or anything around feeding or meal times. Feeding kids is really stressful, complicated, and exhausting. And so I just take it as learning opportunities and ways we can brainstorm for improvement. I also like to recognize the fact that eating is very personal and everyone has their own history around eating, nutrition, growth. So maybe as children, we were growing in a really small body or a bigger body, and that's dictating how our child grows. Or maybe we grew up with a very unhealthy relationship around food, and that's something to really consider as we're parenting our children at meal times. So we like to consider the history and kind of the cultural aspect around food, and that's first and foremost. And then from there, I would say we're just really trying to meet the family where they're at. If right now meal times are in front of the TV and the parent is feeding the child, like no one is doing anything wrong. We are just trying to take steps towards improvement. And what are the most realistic first steps that we're taking? Of course, it's a goal to be sitting at the table as a family eating without having a distraction and the child independently feeding themselves. But we really have to break it down into a stepwise approach to make it realistic for everybody and recognize all the barriers and things that are at play in that feeding environment and what's the goal of the family too. So I think that's really the most important thing that I look at when I'm guiding families.
Absolutely. I think those baby steps are really important. I think a lot of us see things on social media and we see quote unquote, maybe perfect families and perfect children and eating all different fruits and vegetables and colors and proteins and everything. But we need to realize for ourselves what is realistic, and taking those baby steps, I think, is really important, and the way that we're going to get to whatever our goal is. So I really love that approach. You mentioned bigger bodies, smaller bodies. I'm sure that's part of your practice. Growth and the opposite, problems with excess weight. So how do you talk with families about weight, whether you are trying to have the kids gain weight or trying to make sure that they're at a healthy weight for their bodies?
Great. That is the golden question here.
And it's hard. It is a hard question.
I know. And I think we're all just learning and doing our best. And the discussion has also evolved, right? Maybe from 20 years ago when we were brought up to be thinking about weight and bodies to how we're supporting children now. And we're trying to not only evolve in ourselves, but also teach our parents to evolve in that discussion, right? I think there's a really fine balance between supporting a child to grow in the best way that they can for their body, while also recognizing that we can be healthy at a lot of different sizes. And there's also a part of growth that is outside of our control. So I always look at this whole big picture, even though my job is to look at diet and nutrition. I first start with, let's look at the family history and how our mom and dad or grandparents were growing, and recognize that that's the piece that's really out of our control. And we might need to, in some pieces, come to terms with our body naturally follows one of their growth trajectories. So that's number one, because I do feel a lot of parents come to me feeling shame around the way their child's growing, even though it's really right in line with the way that they grew, and we can still be healthy in that way. of course, any kind of underlying medical things. And that's when I look at GI or endocrinology to help guide us to make sure we're not missing anything that could help support their growth. And then finally, the nutrition and the activity piece, right? What are our food choices, our schedule, our drink choices, the environment around eating? Are we relying on a lot of sugary drinks, or are we doing a ton of fast food or constant grazing or late night eating, right? Are we following a really sedentary lifestyle, or are we moving our body enough? So there's a lot of those things that I'm looking at. But of course, even if there are 10 different things to address, we are breaking it down, wanting to set very small, realistic goals, knowing that we're in it for the long term and that we really need to establish this foundation over time in order to make lasting change, rather than just putting all the 10 recommendations out there at once and feeling like it's unrealistic to follow through.
Absolutely. And like you said, it's looking at the whole picture, right? It's not just one meal here or there. It's not just Halloween night with lots of candy. That's not going to make or break your child's health. It's really looking at the whole picture and trying to set in those habits at an
Yeah.
early age.
And one thing too, I'll add is that it's really complicated to look at the parent and child dynamics and what is the role of the parent versus the child when it comes to eating. And if the child is growing in a bigger body, I still think it is the job of the child to listen to their body and teach them how to eat mindfully for the long term. So if the parent is always dictating the portion sizes, how much to eat, I think that can make it really hard when the child goes off to eat with friends in teenage years or in college years to eat in the school dining hall. They don't know how to select the right portion sizes or stop when they feel full because mom and dad have always dictated that for them. So I think I always say the parents are in charge of what is on the menu and when the food is going to be served. But we really want to start instilling a lot of kind of independence onto the child to listen to their body and eat the amount that they want from what is served. Of course, as long as the environment is set up, and they're eating at the table without a lot of distractions, that's also really important to be able to listen to their body and eat mindfully. So we're looking at the dynamics and the long-term environment for success.
And are there certain ages or stages where you go through those things? So at what point do you let them choose the portion sizes? Is there a certain age, or how do you have those conversations?
Yeah, great question. So I think it's really nuanced, right? There's times we're at a party versus we're at like a family dinner table, and all these things are at play here, right? So thinking about the younger kids, for example, I definitely, if we're setting up the environment that is allowing them to have a balanced meal and eat without distractions, I don't necessarily dictate portion sizes at ever, but I do have kind of some like nuances within that, right? So number one, if it's a food that we're going to run out of and it needs to be shared among the family, right? So I'll use the example of we have a pint of raspberries, everyone gets a small handful, and that's what we get. And if we're still hungry, we can eat other items, right? So it's an availability thing there, right? There's also the kind of GI and digestive aspect to it, right? And so maybe from a health standpoint, like it's not safe for us to eat endless amounts of cookies at the meal, right? So everyone's having one cookie or two cookie, and then we can have other items that are available because we don't want anyone to get a bellyache. So I might communicate that to a younger child. And then lastly, I usually use like time as more of a guide rather than the amount. And if the meal's going on for 30 minutes and we have to start bedtime or move on to playtime, that's really a very finite way to explain to the child that we're actually done with the meal because the meal is ending, not because you had too much or you need to eat less or anything like that.
And are there any red flags that you see that parents should watch out for? And it could be anywhere on the spectrum, but red flags that you would worry about, that parents should worry about.
Yeah, I'm just thinking about a recent patient I had yesterday, growing in a larger body and gaining weight a little quickly, making a lot of improvements, but overall having a very limited variety of fruits and vegetables, so almost really not really eating them day to day in a full serving size quantity. I think that's a big barrier for success. We put a lot of focus on protein and, of course, fiber in our grain foods, but I think one of the things that's lacking most in these kids' diets is just adequate fruit and vegetable intake. For some kids, it's an availability thing and they just don't have a ton at home that they're interested in eating, right? And what one parent thinks might be appetizing to them might be different than what the child finds appetizing in terms of their fruits and vegetables. Then also potentially a texture issue, right? Or a sensory problem going on there, just lack of practice and exposure around those foods. So I definitely feel we need to look at the fact that they're getting enough variety from each food group in order to set them up for success to grow adequately. That's one big red flag. I think other ones just being issues around attention at the table. There's a lot of kids that are struggling with ADHD and distractibility, and how can we set them up to eat within the allotted time? We see a lot of very long, drawn out meals, or a lot of force feeding or negotiation at the table, or trying to snack late at night because they didn't get enough during the day. So just really looking at the environment and the variety.
And when you talk about negotiation, so do you deal, and I'm talking, I guess, more personal, right? Because certainly I have a little one at home. The old technique of you have to eat a few more vegetables in order to get dessert or XYZ. Does that work? What do you recommend in that scenario?
Yeah, that's a great question. So back to respecting that all families are different and that we are not trying to put anyone into one box. I always see, okay, is it working or is it a problem? So if that's working for your family and that's getting your child to eat some more bites of vegetables and they're happy at the table and it's productive, right? And everyone's getting what they need accomplished. Sure, let's keep going with it. No problem. I don't want to dictate any changes that need to be made if something's working. If we are negotiating around extra bites of one food in order to get to the other, and it's causing tantrums or tears or just general distress trying to escape the table, they are nonstop negotiating around dessert and we're not able to enjoy our mealtime environment. That's really the sign for me that we need to make a change. And ideally, I separate one food from another, because I think if we put cupcakes up on the pedestal as the food that you get, if you eat enough broccoli, then the child innately will connect broccoli as the bad food and cupcakes as the good food. And so then how are we ever going to convince our child to eat broccoli on their own devices in the future? Ideally, we're neutralizing our food in general and we're just putting it down and we're saying this is what's available. I think there's ways to handle dessert, all different things. In my house, we just have it very black and white, where it's desserts are available on the weekends at dinner time, but not on the weekdays. Just felt led to less room for negotiation or confusion. Sometimes I'll put the dessert right there at the beginning of the meal, so they're not holding out or waiting for it. And other times I'll set dinners at 6 and desserts at 7 and eat what you want until the dessert comes out. But I try to keep it more neutral, matter of fact, and it's not that one food is better than the other. And then finally, if dessert is served at a separate time from the meal and we feel the child is truly hungry and it's, hey, here's cake, right? Here's cookies. You haven't eaten for a few hours and we're going to have a dessert. I really try to pair it with other food groups to make it more satisfying. So here's your milk and cookies and a banana. Just how do we make it a little more well-rounded so they don't feel like they have to keep seeking more and more of the sugary food?
Perfect. And what are your thoughts about hiding vegetables in a cupcake, a muffin, pasta sauce, that type of
That's
thing?
awesome.
How do you feel about
Yeah. Awesome question too. So I reframe it, not that hiding the bad word, but as the word incorporating, I think is a little bit more productive when
I
we
like
think
that.
about how to get those vegetables and fruits in there. And I think for everybody, it can be tough to eat a bowl of raw carrots, right? Even most adults aren't drawn to that. And so how do we make fruits and vegetables taste more delicious and make them more enticing to consume, right? And I think a lot of it is incorporating it into our foods that we find already very tasty. So making a zucchini chocolate chip muffin, absolutely. If that's a way that you or maybe even your child will be able to enjoy zucchini, then I think it's a great idea. I also remind families that the same vitamins are in fruits that are in vegetables. And so if we are a very heavy fruit consuming family and the vegetables are a little more lacking, it might not be something to stress out about because we're still meeting our basic needs. And we can work on vegetable exposures over time. So the vegetables are a hard one. I will say my 5-year-old barely eats any vegetables in their whole forms. Sometimes they are incorporated, but he eats a lot of fruits. And that I know reassures me that he's getting what he needs. So a little less vegetables are a little bit less of the red flag category for me, but I'm considering all of the food groups.
I love it. And I love that word incorporating instead of hiding. I will definitely use that in the future. That is excellent. Excellent. So, what are some small changes, some small, maybe practical changes that parents can take away? Easy, or easy in quotes, easy, practical things that parents might do on a day to day basis.
Perfect. Yeah. So just in my recent patients that I'm thinking of on the top main things we're looking at. So number one, I think in a lot of the teenagers are seeing that breakfast isn't being consumed consistently. And the way I like to explain the importance of breakfast is that if we're not giving our body enough energy in the first part of the day from food, it's going to need that amount of energy in the 24-hour period. So it's going to have to make up for it later in the day. And we might find that we're more tired, having a harder time paying attention in school. But then in the afternoon or evening hours, that's when it's hard to really slow down. And we are going to feel like we need to eat an excessive amount of food at one time, which could be really hard to digest, right? And also, I know from my experience, when I'm starving, overly hungry, or what I say, hangry, the last thing I want to do is eat fruits and vegetables and a nice balanced meal there. So I really stress the consistency, the importance of eating consistently throughout the day to help with digestion, to help with keeping our blood sugars really stable, and to help prevent that hangry feeling or low energy potentially happening later in the day. How do we go about eating breakfast? Sometimes when we're recovering from a stomach bug, for instance, we're not going to go and seek out food. Food's not the thing that sounds appetizing when we don't have much of an appetite there. But I always say the job is the parent's role is to provide the food, right? So the teen might not be quite ready to go and make themselves a fully balanced breakfast in the morning. Or even if the parent says, "What do you want for breakfast?" They might have a quick, "Nothing, I'm good" response. But in reality, when the food is put down in front of them, that's a bit of an easier selling point. So maybe the child is only going to grab themselves some dry cereal. Maybe the parent's adding the boiled egg on the side and an apple or something just to balance it out. Or maybe the child refusing breakfast altogether, but the parent's going to put something out on the table. It can be something small. Just take that extra step for them. They don't have to be forced to eat it, but sometimes when it shows up in front of them, it's a little bit of an easier sell. So I think the breakfast eating is really key. And then another thing I find is just more communication streamlined around food in the family. So a lot of times we're on autopilot, we're getting the same foods from the grocery store, preparing the same meals, and there's not a lot of back and forth communication within the family unit. So I'd love to check in with the kids. What are some meals that we haven't had in a while that you are interested in? Or let's all go to the grocery store and everyone can pick out the fruits and vegetables they want for the week. Let's look for some recipes online or get in the kitchen together. So I think just having the discussion around food separate from just at the dinner table once the food is ready so that the child feels like they have a little bit more say in the menu and can take some more initiative there.
I think that's a great idea. I think having everyone working together in the kitchen, and even if the first recipe that your child finds is not the healthiest recipe, that's okay because it's a skill to get in the kitchen, to cook, to bake. Certainly it's quality time. And I think that's a really great point, and I think that's really important for families. Is there anything else as we start to wrap up? Anything else that you wish families, parents would know about feeding their kids?
Yeah, I think generally my kind of mission is to just bring the role of the dietitian more to the forefront. I think that a lot of times parents will go to their child's annual physical and express concerns about their picky eating or stress at meal times. And oftentimes it's written off as that's normal, that's age appropriate, they'll eat eventually. And I think that another year or two goes by and maybe the pattern has continued or even gotten worse. And there's even more stress or aversion at meal times or pressure or anything like that. So I like to use a dietitian as a preventative measure here and just offer my services or someone similar to me earlier on to just help support either that child or the family unit as a whole in terms of their nutrition and mealtime environment. So I think that's where I would leave it is just know that I'm available, even if there aren't any huge red flags around food and nutrition.
Absolutely. A lot of it is just preventing, being able to nip it in the bud before it gets to be a problem. And if families are looking for someone like you, where can they find you?
Yeah, you can reach out to me on my website. It's capitalpediatricnutrition.com. We support families in DC, Maryland, Virginia, and then also New Jersey, Pennsylvania, and Delaware. And so please feel free to reach out by my website. You can call me or email me and we can set up a time.
Perfect. Thank you so much for joining us. If anyone has any other questions for Brittany or for myself, you can contact us, and certainly stay tuned for another episode of the Endo Kids Podcast. Thank you so much for joining us on the Endo Kids Podcast. We hope you're leaving with a little more knowledge and a lot more confidence. If you have questions, stories, or topics you'd love us to cover, please send them our way. We love hearing from you. And don't forget to check out our website, www.endokidsconcierge.com, for free resources, guides, and more ways to connect. You're not alone on this journey. We're here to support you and your family every step of the way. If you enjoyed this episode, don't forget to subscribe to our podcast so you never miss an update.